Okay, let's get started. A new chapter, but not only a new chapter, moving on from a lot of the ideas that we discussed will start to come together and continue on in the journey of the struggle of the Beinoni, the animal soul, and the godly soul. So in the previous chapters, we explained man's two souls. And when I say man, throughout the class, of course, refers to both men and women. But the two souls that we have, the godly soul, the Elokit, the godly soul, and the Bahamit, the animal soul, each has its own unique set of faculties, expression, the inner pole, its inner drive is towards. And the Alter Rebbe also, which for the godly soul, it's towards transcending self, to godliness, to holiness, spirituality. For the animal soul, it's a pull towards self, towards ego, selfishness, emotion, wants, and desires. The Alter Rebbe also explained, we discussed at length, the difference between Kedusha, holiness, and Klippa, that which conceals holiness, what is holy and what is not. And the two categories within of that which is not holy, there's the holiness that can be extracted, and therefore we are to engage with those things and try to elevate them and extract and fill them with godliness and holiness, moving them over from the side of Klippa to the side of holiness. And then there's the three impure Klippot that cannot be elevated, and therefore we refrain from engaging with those particular things. And anything that's in the middle Klippa that is used for selfishness or anything ungodly gets moved over to the side of the three impure Klippot, either temporarily or permanently, which would require a serious amount of, very intense amount of tshuva in order to release them. In this present chapter, chapter 9, the Alter Rebbe, how you doing?
Hey,
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Just in time. In the present chapter, the Alter Rebbe begins to discuss the battle that's fought within the Jew between these two souls. First, he wants us to know, and we discussed this perhaps briefly previously, where the animal soul resides within the person. Where's the home or the home base for the animal soul? And this is not a physical thing, but this is a spiritual or metaphoric idea. And where is the home for the godly soul? Where does the godly soul, where does it primarily reside? So he tells us that the abode, the home for the animal soul, which comes from Klipat Noga, which comes from the energy which conceals godliness in every Jew, meaning the place where the animal soul is most manifest, is most expressed, is in the
Heart.
In the heart. Very good. For as mentioned in previous chapters, the animal soul is predominantly emotional. And that's reflected. The heart is the seat of the emotion. Because the animal soul resides in the heart, therefore all emotions and passions and lusts and anger and boasting and similar emotions, they stem from the heart, which is where the animal soul resides, and from the heart it spreads to the entire body. And as we discussed, not only does it spread to the entire body, but included in that, it flows to the mind as well. But then you have the reverse of how it's supposed to be, which is that the mind then follows after the heart. Because from the heart, it rises to the brain, and to think about and to utilize the intellect, to think about and to meditate about what it wants, what I want, and how do I get what I want. And not to do so foolishly, to do so with intellect, and to figure it out, and to be smart and cunning about it. So just as the blood is in the seat of the heart, and from the heart it circulates to every organ, rising also to the brain that's in the head, that's the same is true with the animal soul. It primarily connected to the heart, and from there it spreads and pervades throughout the entire body, including the mind. So, in the case of the animal soul, the brain and all of the intellectual faculties that a person possesses, instead of motivating the heart and guiding the heart to follow after it, the mind, in this case, reacts to and serves as a tool to realize and to recognize and to get in a practical sense, the passions of the heart. And we discussed this idea earlier, and that's concerning the animal soul. What about the godly soul? Ach makom mishkan nefesh halokit, the abode, the home for the godly soul, who? B'mochin shebarosh. It's in the intellect, the brain that is in the head. Umisham mispashetes lekole varim, and from there it pervades and extends to the rest of the body. So you have very similar things, just from different starting points. For the animal soul, it starts in the heart, so the focus is going to be driven by emotion, and from there, that it doesn't just remain emotion, but it stems and it pervades and it's experienced throughout the entire body, including the intellect, including the hands and feet, right? To get up and do and act in a way to get what you want. The godly soul operates in a similar capacity, but its home base is the intellect. This soul is connected to the mind, to the seichel, which is the intellect, and meaning the divine soul is essentially rooted in understanding and awareness. And then the Alter Rebbe continues to explain in the beginning of the chapter that the divine soul doesn't remain only in the brain, but also it pervades through the rest of the body. It should pervade and spread through the rest of the body. We'll discuss the struggle that there's some opposition, inner opposition, internal opposition that challenges it from doing so, but that's the goal. And he says, not only does it impact the rest of the body, but it also finds a home in the heart as well. But he explains here that the heart has the right ventricle and the left ventricle. There's two parts of the heart. The animal soul primarily resides in the left side of the heart, which metaphorically, I'm not sure if this is, biologically speaking, it's this way, but that drives more of a person's feelings. Whereas the right side of the heart is what causes the blood to flow through the rest of the body. That's more of its focus. So similarly, the godly soul starts from the brain and it enters into the right side of the heart, and that allows it to then be permeated through and pervade through the rest of the body. Because the idea, of course, is not that the godly soul just remains intellectual or philosophical or ideas, but you're also meant to feel very much alive in your spiritual pursuit, in your godly pursuit. So it does very much impact the heart. And he says specifically and metaphorically, it's the right side of the heart. And he goes on to explain how it works. He gives two examples. And again, we discussed this earlier, the idea of the Chabad process, Chachma Bina Das, through that intense intellectual focus on Chachma, then Bina, and then Das, what is supposed to happen? You're supposed to develop an emotion, a feeling towards that which you were thinking about. So through reflection and through a meditation, you're supposed to develop a feeling. Where is that feeling developed? In the heart. And that's the expression of the divine soul inside the heart. And he says specifically, again, metaphorically, in the right side of the heart. And from there, it permeates through the rest of the body. He gives two examples of two sort of, and we gave different meditation samples, and he gives two very brief ideas, and just quoting from the English of the chapter. And he says, this revelation in the heart of the divine soul residing in the brain is man's fiery love toward God, which flares up in the heart of discerning men. Meaning, if you go through the process of discernment, of recognition, of the intellectual process of reflection, who utilize their power of Chachma, who understand and reflect with their faculty of Bina, right? Chachma is just that general idea. Bina is the next stage of unpacking and reflecting and analyzing the idea, by which they understand the matter in all its details and ramifications. That's Bina, with the power of applied knowledge in their brain. What's applied knowledge? That's Das, applying it, internalizing it with their faculty of Das, by which they immerse themselves and sensitize themselves to that which they understand, to really go through the process of thinking about and reflecting on any one particular idea as it relates to godliness, Torah, mitzvot. And then what happens? Thus, the love flares up in the hearts of those who utilize all three faculties of Chachma, Bina, and Das on matters that arouse and awaken this love in contemplation of God's greatness.
So that is also to do the things? Like
No.
After you...
Das is what leads directly to doing the things, because it's when you ask yourself, what am I going to do about it? That question, but asking it honestly, is Das. Because you can have ideas that you think about and you meditate about and you reflect on. It could be Chachma Bina, but if you don't say, what am I going to do about it? How is this going to apply to my day-to-day life? Then that's lacking the Das. Once you have the Das, it applies it to yourself. It attaches. Das is attachment, and that's what leads to action.
Sorry, to go through that attachment, because you called it connection before too, but what is that?
Connecting it to yourself. Attaching it to yourself, as opposed
the idea,
to, because our brain is in us, but it's not us. Who are we? We are a consciousness. We're complicated. Yeah. So when we have an idea, that idea is not us. How do I know it's not me? Because I didn't know the idea yesterday, and I may forget it in a week from now. But I hear this idea, and I'm inspired by this idea, and how do I actually allow this idea to have any type of sustaining impact? Is with Das, is with saying, great that I have this idea, what does it mean to me? What am I going to do about it? So, we've given this example many times before. We were at a class, right? Last night, Tuesday night class, we talked about a Jewish authenticity, doing one thing but truly authentic. And you could have two people that leave the class and both of them truly grasp the concept, which is Chachma, and actually thought about it and had Bina. One person took on a mitzvah and the other next week is going to say, Rabbi, what are we talking about this week? And I say, well, what are we talking about last week? And I don't know. I don't remember. It was probably something on the Parsha. It was nice. I remember it was great. What's the difference? Is one person asked that most difficult question of, okay, what does it mean to me in my life? My individual life, with my idiosyncrasies, with my challenges, with my in the situation, with my family. What does this mean to me? And then to actually, once a person says that, that's when it's going to lead to action. So the love, it flares up in a Jew's heart. It comes from contemplation that awaken and inspire love. So it starts here. Contemplation on Hashem's greatness, for example. And thus, the understanding and reflecting on the understanding, it causes love in God's heart. In man's heart. And that's one example of the love starting from the brain and reaching the heart. He goes on with another example, it's a little bit more specific. But I want to give you my own personal example. So last week, I had two stories that, and I shared this Tuesday night, I shared it again on Shabbos. I've been sharing this because it's really awesome. But this is when something went from like theoretical, at least for me, and became very practical, and then it inspired a real awe. I was really in awe, in this case of God. And I'll share one of the stories. I was on the way back from LA last Tuesday, and I'm never in LA on Tuesday. I have a class Tuesday afternoon. I'm never in LA on Tuesday. For whatever reason, I had to be in LA on Tuesday, or I decided to be, and there's a whole series of events that led to why I was in LA on last Tuesday. On the way back, Chanasteri texts me that I should reach out to someone in the community whose father's in the hospital, and he's asking to put on tefillin. So I said, okay. So I immediately call, and her name is Ava, and I said, Ava, what's going on? She says, my dad's in the hospital, and he really wants to put on tefillin. So I was thinking, my mind starts, okay, we're going to figure this out. But it's 10:30. I have a class at 12. I still got to get back. I still got to prepare for this class. And so I figured right after, I said, how does 1:30 work? And she said, Dad, the rabbi can be there at 1:30. And he's like, okay. And it was clear that it was very urgent in his, you can hear it, and later when I saw him, he was desperate to put on tefillin, which is, that in and of itself is an amazing thing. But so I sit and I figured, okay, I have to ask which hospital are you at? And I figured, I don't know why, I just decided it was probably Los Robles. That's where my mind went, because they live in Agura, and I figured Los Robles. She says, we're in Tarzana, UCLA. I'm on the freeway, and as she says that, on my left is Tarzana, UCLA. I'm literally about 15 seconds from the Reseda exit to get off to go to the hospital. And so I tell, I said, Ava, how about if I can be there? And she's like, oh, at 1:30, I won't be there, so you'll have to speak to them if he's in the ICU, so if they'll let you in. I said, Ava, how about if I can show up in 5 minutes? And she's like, Rabbi, how can you be here in 5 minutes? And I said, let God figure that part out. I didn't have tefillin with me, so UCLA Tarzana is literally across the street from Chabad Tarzana. I call Rabbi Yankee Khan. I said, Yankee, are you at Chabad? He said, yeah. I said, I need you to meet me outside, a drive-by tefillin drop-off. You give me a pair of tefillin. I pull up, Yankee comes out, he gives me a pair of tefillin, he gives me a yarmulke, I asked for a tzedakah box, I wanted to put a tzedakah box in the room. He gives me this package. I'm in the hospital not 5 minutes later. I'm in the ICU putting on tefillin on this precious yid who he was on a ventilator. He'd been taken off, and the first thing, either earlier that night or that morning, and the first thing he asked for was to put on tefillin, and he was crying that he wants to put on tefillin. And to me, what was so obvious here that became something that I speak about, but it came to life was really two things that I was reflecting on, which is one, divine providence, how God is running everything, and He's in control, and how the odds of me being literally in front of Tarzana UCLA on a Tuesday afternoon, to be able to be there within 5 minutes of someone that really wanted to put on tefillin, it's more likely to say that it was a miracle than it was than the odds. It's so crazy to think. And number two is Hashem's love for every Jew. And this yid sitting in the hospital, he went to emergency surgery. He was going through a very difficult time. He wanted to do tefillin. He wanted to connect to God. And God says, you want to connect? Let's do it. And I could have somebody, not only somebody, your family rabbi. I can have him there in just a few minutes. So this is an idea that I felt in awe. And that's something that you can go many days not feeling. It doesn't mean you don't do. You're doing, but you don't necessarily have the feeling. And then sometimes something comes to light that makes you feel differently about everything. You're like, wow, Hashem is really in control. And at that point, there was something we were trying to figure out, and I was like, okay, God's got this. He has us, He loves us, and He'll take care of us, because it's so clear here of how much in control He is. And that story really highlighted that for me. And what the Alter Rebbe is telling here is you don't have to wait for an amazing story to take place. Is you can develop that in your own life. You can literally create that through the process of Chachma Bin Adas. Take one idea, reflect on it, think about it, meditate on it. When we say meditate, it sounds like a whole. Just think about it. Give it some time where you're not distracted. Think about the idea, and then personalize it, connect to it, attach to it, and then it could actually have a change in your feeling within the heart. And he gives a second example. He says, similarly, another deeper way in which the heart's emotion gives expression to the presence of the divine soul in the brain is the gladness of the heart at comprehending or apprehending, recognizing the beauty of God and the majesty of His glory. This too is a case where the mind gives emotion to the heart for the gladness that is awakened when the divine soul's intellectual faculties gaze intently. When it says gaze, meaning focuses intently at the glory of the King and the beauty of His unfathomable, infinite, and boundless greatness, which was connected to the meditation we did maybe a few months ago, then the heart rejoices and is glad, as explained elsewhere. So he just gives a very, very brief idea, process of if you focus on it. We'll continue throughout Tanya, going through some of these reflections. But if you go through this, what does it do? It doesn't, the good divine soul, which exists in the brain, doesn't remain in the brain, doesn't remain in the intellect. It has an opportunity, it has the possibility of traveling down and being channeled into the heart to actually feel connected, and then which develops an emotion, a love, an awe, a fear, or other types of emotions. And that ultimately is what gets you, more than anything, to be proactive and productive and to turn it into action.
So always when you get mad, like you're not in the nefesh elokit?
Yes,
Always?
almost always. Almost always. There are certain exceptions. If you're angry of what Hamas did on October 7th, that's good. That's good anger. That's from your nefesh elokit. And it says even anger at a child that is necessary. The Rambam says it should only be perceived anger. You should show him that you're angry, or them or her that you're angry, so they see that it's so serious. But you shouldn't really be angry, even in those times. That anger is if and we're not saying it's a bad thing, because your animal soul is not bad. It's part of who you are, and it's part of what we're going to explain in the Tanya. But we're definitely going to be encouraged and given the tools and certain ways to train ourselves to not get as angry, but more importantly, how to control the anger and the importance of doing that, and other such ideas. Okay, so that was the first part of the chapter. The Alter Rebbe has established that each of these two souls, the godly soul and the animal soul, each has their own separate home within the body and its own way of functioning. And again, he's not giving us like a lesson in the anatomy of the body physically, that the godly soul, like if you can remove it surgically, or the animal soul can be removed surgically. It's these are, when we talk about it being in the brain, meaning its primary expression is going to be through intellect, and the primary expression of the animal soul is going to be through emotion. So what is the difference? And again, these are ideas, we're revisiting a lot of these ideas, which have laid the groundwork, but it's important to revisit them in order to move forward with this chapter. So what is the primary difference between the intellectual process, which is the godly soul, and the emotional process, which is the animal soul? So seichel, which is intellect, by definition, strives for objectivity, to be totally objective. Truth is its guiding light. Is that when a person truly thinks about something, then his feelings or her feelings, their impulses, personal preferences are meant to be set aside. And if they're not set aside, then it's really biased. It's not true. It's not a true intellectual process that's totally removed from objectivity, from personal biases. So the question is not, do I like something or how do I feel about it? That's what the animal soul asks, but the intellect looks at something of what is true, right? That's why in science, how you're supposed to look at something, you're not supposed to have a starting point of what I believe, which is unfortunately, it gets mixed in, or unfortunately or fortunately, whatever it is, because we're all human beings, but true, like utter expression of intellect is no personal preferences mixed in. Real seichel, real intellect requires a person to move beyond himself or herself to encounter the thing as it is, purely. Midos, emotions, on the other hand, are very different. They don't operate from that set of principles. There is the central question of how I feel about it, how I relate to it, how this touches my identity, my experience. And therefore, midos are not negative, they're not bad, but they are simply subjective by nature, because you're involving yourself. So they're the way that a person experiences a reality, not the way he objectively understands it. Does that make sense? I'll say that again. The way a person experiences this reality, so my experience and my identity and my personality is very much part of the equation. In fact, it's the core of the foundation of the equation, as opposed to the intellect, which is to objectively understand something. This is why a parent, for example, cannot judge their own child totally objectively. The moment that it's my child, then the issue is already shifted from pure intellect to emotion. There's love involved, there's connection involved. The heart's invested. And once the heart is invested, the mind often stops seeking the truth and begins to defend what it wants and what it feels. It tells us, the Torah says that we shouldn't, that bribery is forbidden biblically. So that we understand. But it says that it leads to blindness. Why does it lead to blindness? Well, this idea is that once a person, so it's talking about not necessarily physical blindness, but it leads to blindness because once a person has been emotionally moved, then they can't really judge in an open way, in a true way. So there's a blindness there. They're not really seeing the thing from the truth, totally objective. The intellect may still function. We're not saying the intellect shuts off, but now it's serving the emotion. We need money. We love money. And this person has paid me. Now I owe something. And now suddenly, even if you say, I can have the best of both worlds. I'll take the money and I'll still be objective in the way I deal with this situation. We're talking about a judge who's judging a case. You can't be. You can't be. The Talmud lists different stories. That there was someone, all these different stories. There was someone who would bring him a basket of fruit every week. A rabbi in the Talmud. Someone would bring it every week because that was just, and he was I think he was even a messenger. It wasn't even his own. He would bring him a basket every week. And he shows up one day. He's a rabbi that was in the Beis Din. He was on the court. He shows up one day and this guy was there. There was a case involving him. And it was his day. He was going to be there. It was like his special day they had shifts. It was his day to judge. And he recused himself. And he says, I can't because he's someone that brought me gifts. I can't be completely unbiased. There's emotion involved. And the Talmud then lists all these stories of just how sensitive we are to this idea of once the emotion, once the heart is involved. So true seichel, true intellect, it demands a person sets aside, they subjugate their frame of reference, and they rise above assumptions, they rise above self. And that's why someone who becomes opinionated 5 minutes after hearing a class and asks all these questions and challenges will really learn something new. Not to say asking is bad, but not the idea, not allowing it to permeate and the emotion reacting, then it's very difficult for the seichel, for the intellect to function in its true capacity. Learning requires the ability to listen. That's why children sometimes have more naturally than adults, where they learn, they pick up so quickly because they don't yet carry the same ego, that investment, and the need to judge immediately. So when you hear a new idea, right away you have this reaction of like, who does he think he is telling me I should do this? And am I really lacking that in my life? Am I really? And you start to emotionally be invested in this. Whereas a child, they don't have that ego at that age. So you teach them something new, boom, they can learn, they can grow, they can adapt much quicker.
It's a little bit like these lawyers in a case, let's say a trial, and they have to pick a jury, and they're trying to find people they're probably trying to find people that think their way.
They want the people that are most emotionally invested.
Right. But ultimately, in many cases, they're looking for somebody as objective as they can be.
Or subjective to what they think is the truth.
Yeah, what they think is the truth. Which is, so that's really the question, is we all have all these experiences and emotions tied up. So, this whole concept of divorcing from that and really being truly...
It's a struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the Tanya. So that's where we're going. So the Alter Rebbe's point is this. The Nefesh HaBahamit is deeply connected to the heart and the emotional experiences of life, the animal soul, while the Nefesh Elokit, the godly soul, is connected to the mind and the intellectual, cognitive search for truth. And so it's not just a difference of function, it's a core difference of their core identity. At the center of the natural soul, the animal soul, is one reality. What's that one reality? It's one word. In fact, it's one letter. I. That's it. That's the foundation. I exist. I need. I want. And its entire structure is built around self-preservation, self-enhancement, self-fulfillment, self-respect, success. And it's not something it has to learn. It doesn't have to learn to take care of itself. It's its starting point. I is its starting point. And we're going to, we've discussed, and we'll discuss, that in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it definitely presents a challenge. And even when it does think, in other words, it uses the intellect, it's thinking often of how to serve and protect that pre-existing self. The divine soul is completely different. It doesn't begin with I, it begins with truth. Those are very different things. It seeks what's real, what's ultimate, and what life is truly about, the intellect on its own. So its quest, its search, and its goal is not to validate self, not to validate what I want, but to align with emes, to align with truth. And that's why the divine soul is rooted in seichel, pure, cold, hard seichel. Because true intellect begins not with what do I want, but what is true. That's why that's where the godly soul feels at home. So you can see that, understand now why a person could be brilliant, but he's still not expressing true seichel. You would, if you see a Jew who's brilliant, you would say, wow, his godly soul is on fire. But that's not necessarily the case. Because as we said, a person may have a sharp mind, but use that mind to devise a dishonest scheme. Because in that case, the brilliance of the seichel, of the intellect, is used as a tool for the heart in order to receive what it wants. So intellect on its own is not an indication of the godly soul. It's very possible you're using the intellect in order to, again, as a tool for the animal soul. If the mind never asks, do I have a right to do this at all? Should I be doing this at all, thinking about this at all? Then it's not serving truth, it's serving ego. And the ego is like, this is what I want. You figure out how to get it for me. Like someone go to an attorney, like, here's what I want. Find the case for me. Find the way that, and you have the attorney will get to work creating a new reality based on a pre-existing notion of something, what he's trying to accomplish, what he wants. So there's a lot of intellect involved there, but it's not necessarily seeking the truth. And maybe for the attorney, that is his seeking of truth is to defend his client. But the point remains the same. So the intellect is constantly questioning itself. It's willing to ask themselves, a person operating with the intellect, true intellect, ask himself of whether his desires, his assumptions, and his claims are even justified, right? That's intellect. And this is the difference between the two souls. The Bahamut, the animal soul, it's impulsive, it's self-oriented, and the Elokit, the godly soul, reflective, truth-oriented. The Bahamut, the animal soul, is moved by temptation, instant gratification. The Elokit, on the other hand, the godly soul, is guided by purpose, by vision, by destiny. The animal soul begins with self, uses the mind to implement what his self wants. The divine soul begins with truth, and the heart then is drawn after that truth. This is the first part of the chapter. And here's where we begin to discuss the battle between these two ideas. Because just in case we mistakenly conclude that each soul goes about its own affairs, living its own life without interfering with the other, like you do you and I'll do me, and let's just live peacefully side by side, the Alter Rebbe continues that is very much not the case. And here I would say we've transitioned from this is Tanya. Not that what we were learning until now wasn't, but much of what we were discussing until now was laying the foundation, the groundwork to have a certain background and understanding of these ideas in order to really appreciate and to begin to have this very discussion. Because, and I'll say it not in the Alter Rebbe's words, but in my own words, if these two souls one was in Beijing and the other was in Alaska, then it wouldn't be a problem because they're each unique and they're different, but they don't know each other, they don't see each other. As I said, you do your thing, I'll do mine. Right? Why do we have to engage in a battle? Even if they were both contained within one body, but one remained in the mind and the other remained in the heart, each one minding their own business, then it would also not be such an issue. The problem is that we have two souls with these two personas that are utterly different from each other and in conflict with each other. and they are in the same body, with the same brain, with the same hands, the same legs, the same eyes, the same ears, the same heart at their disposal. And not only that, but each one was created to dominate with their self-interest of dominating over the entire man's life, over the body. And this dynamic is what creates most of the drama in our life, the internal drama in our life. This is what creates the constant struggle that's ongoing in our life. The struggle between the reflective self, what is true, what am I meant to be doing, how can I be the best me, and the impulsive self, between selfishness and selflessness. Should I say that? Should I not? Should I react this way? Should I not? Should I do that? Should I not? Should I feel this way? Should I not? Egotism, humility. This never-ending dispute, an inner dispute between the desire to be earthly, to be mundane, to be animalistic, and on the other side, the endless yearning of man to transcend his own parameters, to touch the divine, and to live a meaningful and purposeful life. And the struggle of these two realities that exist within the same body, within the same person, with the same set of tools at their disposal, is the theme of the rest of this chapter and much of Tanya. Oftentimes we feel a weakness. How can we liberate ourselves from that I? Why is everything about me? And how do I go about this redemption, this liberation? And one of the main purposes of this whole book and its writing was for this exact question and this quest. The main contribution in this area of Tanya is that man has to first and foremost be aware of these two elements in his life or her life, to identify them and to be constantly aware of the struggle stemming from them. Because sometimes we come into contact with our reflective and visionary divine self, right? You said you had a vision. And we experience a certain high, a clarity. We make a resolution to live in a certain way. And then a few days pass, sometimes even a few hours pass, and sometimes even a few moments pass. And you tell yourself, what are these Baba Mises? What are these? Don't fool yourself with these illusions. This is not you. This is not who you are. You're a beastly animal that vision was a dream, it was a fantasy. And that the animal soul, that temptation tells you, what do you really want? Go do that. And you feel like, okay, that's being true to myself. And this oftentimes puts us into despair. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, there are two souls, and both are true. There's a duality that exists within you that has to be understood, identified, and really appreciated. And this duality, a man or woman never truly rids themselves of. There is the unique tzaddik who eradicates this animal soul, and we'll discuss this tzaddik.
So tzaddik doesn't have the animal soul?
No. Two levels of what happened to it. But the ordinary man, the Beinoni, which we'll continue to discuss, never rids himself of this reality. Rather, he has to identify it, become aware of it, and finally, through being aware of it, aware of this conflict, he can learn to not allow the impulsive ego to dominate his behavior. And so the point here is to develop the tools, the intellectual, emotional, and practical tools to overcome this struggle, this weakness. And that's, again, the theme that's discussed at length in the following chapters.
So what to do?
First is to truly.
Take 2 years for you to find out.
First is to recognize what's happening, right? Because a lot of times it's just the despair itself that is what bothers us, is what pulls us down. But when we understand that there's two consciousnesses within you, there's two souls, and they're both true, And therefore, if a person feels the sense of I, it's not bad. It's who they are. There's ways to deal with that, but it's not bad. And if a person feels a high or an inspiration, then moments later that dissipates, that disappears, they shouldn't feel like that wasn't real. That was very real. And having this clarity of the fact that there are literally two voices within us, just that in and of itself gives us such clarity and comfort. And then we'll begin to discuss the tools how to deal with it. And the Alter Rebbe continues with the perpetual struggle that they undergo between these two souls. It's written in the Torah, in Bereshit, Ula'om mila'om ye'amatz, that one nation shall prevail over the other, will battle over the other. And their might, their dominance will pass from one to the other, pass back and forth. What is this referring to? So this is from the story of Rivka and Yitzchak, Rebecca and Isaac. And this story becomes the template for the perpetual ongoing struggle between our two inner identities. The Torah tells us, this is the story, the Torah tells us that after many years of not being able to conceive, when she finally did, Rivka, the children that she carried in her womb, they agitated her greatly. It's bothering her greatly. V'yisrotzitzu habanim b'kirba. The children were agitating her from within. And this deeply disturbed, deeply perturbed and bothered Rivka. And she went to inquire by God. Batilech lidrosh et Hashem. She went to communicate and ask of God. And God communicates with her. Shnei goyim bibitnech. Two powers will emerge from within you. Ushnei leumim mime'ech yiparedu ulaom milaom ye'amatz. Two powers will emerge from within you. The upper hand will pass from one power to the other and back again. In other words, who has the upper hand? It will go back and forth, describing a struggle, a back and forth of two identities that are within her. And sure enough, she gives birth to both Esav and Yaakov, two twins, each representing two nations. Yaakov, the Jewish nation, Esav, Edom, ultimately Rome, two lives, two philosophies, two convictions, two purposes, two distinct destinies that more often than not have been in conflict with another, one with the other. So every story in the Torah has its concrete, literal meaning, but also has the spiritual counterpart. Our Tuesday night class every week, we look at one idea from the Torah and we unpack it from a deeper perspective. So this same is true with this story. The story of Yaakov and Esav, these two brothers and their mother, and the struggle throughout their lives that's related in the rest of that Torah portion and the coming ones is not just the struggle between two individuals, between Yaakov and Esav. Rather, this story, this struggle, is a mirror that reflects two dynamics that we all have. The story of these two brothers and their ups and their downs and their struggle and their conflict exists and is mirrored in our personal lives. Yaakov represents the divine soul, the divine state of consciousness. Esav represents the animal soul and the selfish state of consciousness. And Rivka carries these two children. But she's deeply upset. She's grieved. And she says these powerful words. Lama ze anochi? Why am I alive? And she communicates her grief with the prophet. And he says, don't worry. There's two nations. And suddenly she's at ease. What's the question? Is why is suddenly she at ease? Did the pain suddenly become lighter? Did its pain suddenly become less intense? What was it about this revelation of the prophet telling her there are two personalities and identities within you that put her at ease? But in light of the spiritual story that was occurring at those very moments, we understand quite clearly why this put her at ease. As explained in the Tanya, beginning in this chapter, man feels constantly, day by day, sometimes hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute, a pull in two opposite directions. And there's a major conflict and duality and multi-personality that characterizes our life. In one moment we feel this urge again to transcend the earthiness and to touch the divine, to do what's right, to live a life of purpose, to put it simply, to do what is good and to do what is right, even if it's not easy. And at that moment, a person, they feel this real inner drive to live in a better way, to do what's right, to do what's honest, to do what's meaningful, even when it's difficult. And he wants his choices and his energy and his character to line up with something higher, with something truer than the comforts of life, than his or her impulse. And in that state, selfish desires and shallow distractions, they suddenly lose much of their allure, much of their pull. They don't seem as exciting. Things that a few moments earlier felt so urgent now seem shallow. They seem empty and not worth it. And at that moment, this person will make a decision to live a life that is holy, that is purposeful and productive, consistent with this feeling. And then a day passes and a week passes, sometimes again even a few moments pass, and the feeling is gone. Boom. And the selfishness kicks back in. The self-indulgence, the ego, the I. Without any deeper vision or destiny, suddenly it's gone. And everyone experiences this at one moment or another, that at one moment you're godly, you're spiritual, and another moment you're totally overtaken by physicality, by self-drive, not even necessarily bad, but self. And in the moment of elevation, the I feels meaningless and purposeless. It's not about me. It's about what I could accomplish, and I'll set my I aside. But then the other side, a moment later, becomes meaningless. Who cares about this vision, this destiny, the truth? What do you want? What makes you feel good? What makes you feel a sense of accomplishment? Self-preservation. And then the question rises in full force, like Rivka asks, Lama ze anochi? Who am I? Who am I really? Am I just a sophisticated animal driven by instinct, or am I a person created in Hashem's image, meant to live a life for something higher, something truer, and something godly? Who am I? What is real? And is that godly experience that I just felt, what was that? Because I don't feel it anymore. And this is not only a philosophical question that we ask, it's an emotional one. If I'm an animal, then why would I do the work? Ultimately, we are who we are, and everything just revolves around this creature and its fantasies. And this leads to despair, to feel like us feeling hypocritical and confused. Answers the prophet, the Navi, to Rivka, no, Rivka, you're making a mistake. Shnei goyim bibitnech. There are two nations in your womb. Shnei le'umim mime'ech yiparedu, and one shall prevail over the other, and it will pass back and forth. That as long as a person makes the mistake of thinking they have one soul, one consciousness, then yes, the question of who I am and what I really want and what my ultimate destiny, that then it would become overwhelming and it would crush us and we'd be in despair, because how can we understand this conflict? But says the Alter Rebbe that there is an essential duality, a multiplicity in the very nature and the very character of who we are. We're not a one-souled creature. We're a two-souled creature. And therefore, if you feel two different things, one moments after the other, it's not really a conflict. It's an expression of who you are. You have an animal soul that's selfish, and you have a godly soul that's selfless. So don't despair the fact that you have this inner conflict, this inner turmoil. That's how you were created. Just that information alone, just that understanding alone, we basically could tell ourselves that we're normal. And there's nothing wrong with this. And that's the cause for so much frustration of why is there this struggle? Why? It doesn't make sense. But if we understand that we have two unique, separate, divine souls within us, then it makes all the sense in the world. We have two complete souls. Each consists of this entire set of will, emotion, of intellect, of instinct, of desires that make up a functioning person. Two souls, each with their own mindset, their own conviction, and they're both true, and they're both real. Neither is a fantasy, neither is fake. So you're not suffering from a disorder. You are experiencing what it means to be a Jew with two souls. And that's why we have the ups and downs. That's why we have the opposing desires that are always characterizing us. On the one hand, yearning for the divine and the spiritual. On the other hand, this deep desire to take care of ourselves. The perpetual struggle between self and selfless, ego and transcendence. The animal soul says, and it's not in Beijing, remember? It's in you. It says, I am here to stay, and I'm here to get what I want, what makes me feel good. The divine soul, which is not in Alaska, it's also in you. Its character begins with this vision of what is true in life. And there's only one truth for the Jew, that's godliness. And that's the all-pervading truth. And this is the meaning of these words, Ulaom milaom yamatz, that there are two governments, there are two regimes, there are two souls, kingdoms. And yes, man has longings and then is overtaken. But that doesn't demonstrate that this spiritual longing was false, or was a fantasy, or was a dream. The divine soul is very true. But there is another soul that took over. And that soul is also true. Because there's another soul, another state of consciousness. And this is the battle that the Alter Rebbe describes. In the continuation I want to do going forward is I actually want to read, we'll go inside the text, maybe I'll print it out for the next class. I want to go inside the text as he describes very vividly this and very explicitly the battle and the struggle between the two souls. And because in order to, Moran wants to know is what do we do about it? In order to understand what to do about it is to understand the source for the struggle and to appreciate and realize that the struggle is normal and it's healthy. In fact, there's something beautiful about that inner struggle. And once we can understand that, then we begin to develop the tools of what to do about it. There was one, do we have any questions?
Need those tools.
I have a question, El Khatit, like about the ritual hand. I spoke with my aunt in Israel and she told me that it's not good that I'm going down the stairs and then I do it in the kitchen. She told me like to do it like next to my room and close the restroom and then do it.
So there's something, yeah, we'll talk about right after I turn off the recording. There is no, it's part of the morning process. But there was one thing that we can discuss maybe next week, but just very briefly, is that there's the question of how do you know, sometimes it's confusing. I think this question did come up in the past. How do you know which voice is what?
It's the truth. Yeah, I ask myself all the last money talking about it, asking myself. So how do you know?
So how do you know? So this is something I want to discuss. So there's the question that has to be asked is what's going to be the outcome if I listen to either voice? And when you answer that question, it always becomes very clear. Or I shouldn't say always, it almost always becomes very clear. And oftentimes it's extremely confusing to make the differentiation between the inner voice and which inner voice it is, and that can drive you crazy. In fact, we're told that sometimes the animal soul, he puts on the clothes. As an example, he puts on the clothes of not just of an Orthodox Jew, but sometimes even of a chassid. And he puts on the clothes of a chassid, and sometimes he tells you, just meditate right now. And he gives you spiritual ideas. He said, that's certainly coming from my godly soul. But if that meditation and reflection is going to be in the place of helping another Jew, of praying, of doing a mitzvah, then at that point, you shouldn't be meditating. At that point, you should be acting. And so how do you decipher between these inner voices? The question is always of what is the outcome going to be? What is this going to impact? So if the one voice says go and do that mitzvah, and it's going to cause a mitzvah to be done, or to help someone else, and the other one's going to cause you to feel lofty and feel inspired and feel spiritual, not that in and of itself is that bad, but right now when I have the opportunity to do something else, then clearly that's a voice of my Yetzirah, my animal soul, wearing the clothing of a chassid. Even sometimes to learn Tanya might not be what we should be doing at this moment. And so, and the voice does become very confusing because the animal soul, he knows how to dress up in different clothes and wear different things and appear different, like camouflage and different appearances in order to confuse us. He's very cunning. And sometimes for you it'll look different, for you it'll look different, and it's hard to completely understand and decipher at times which voice is what, because he by design tries to confuse us. And so the answer is, the exercise to go through in those moments is to ask, what is this going to lead to? What is the direct outcome of this voice, that whenever there's that struggle? Whenever there's that struggle, to ask, and almost all of the time, the answer to that question, which is what will it lead to, because what the animal soul is trying to get you to do is to distract you and to get you to not do that mitzvah. And sometimes he distracts you even with spirituality or other things that seem to be good. And so the question is, what's at stake here? So in every situation, the question is asked of what's going to be the outcome of these decisions. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll stop there. God willing, next week we'll be able to conclude chapter 9. And if anyone has any questions.